Victoria had just become a ghost for 3 months when she won over Hades. I suddenly became Hades' sister-in-law, the most sought-after single female ghost in the entire underworld.
Emily, you need to find yourself a partner. Even Mr. Johnson, who rows the ferry on the River of Forgetfulness, has a companion. And yet, here you are, single and bringing shame to the royal family of Nanzhao.
All right, Margaret. I'll find someone.
Tired of the constant nagging, I randomly grabbed a handsome male ghost and went to the ghost couple registration office. The long-faced female ghost at the desk, with drooping eyelids, flipped through the registry.
This won't do. You already have a man.
Who?
Alexander.
Her words hit like a thunderclap. The underworld had been practicing monogamy for years. Under the pressure of the handsome male ghost and Margaret's gaze, I swallowed hard and hesitantly asked,
What do I need to do to dissolve this marriage contract?
I rubbed my backside as I walked out of the ghost gate. Margaret's kicking skills had become more proficient. I pulled out the crumpled marriage contract from my pocket, frowning in frustration.
Emily, this marriage contract is still valid because it bears the seal of the Imperial Jade Seal, stamped by your younger brother when he was 9 years old.
To dissolve this marriage contract, I needed to obtain a divorce decree with the same seal. I lowered my eyelashes and squatted outside the ghost gate, seriously considering how long it would take to float from here to the imperial city of Charlestown. Margaret's kicking skills had become quite proficient. As I walked out of the ghost gate, I rubbed my backside. I pulled out the crumpled marriage contract from my pocket, frowning in frustration.
This marriage contract is still valid even after my death because it bears the Imperial Jade Seal, stamped by my younger brother when he was 9. Margaret almost fainted when she heard this.
To dissolve the marriage contract, I needed a divorce decree with the same seal. I lowered my eyelashes and squatted outside the ghost gate, counting on my fingers and seriously considering how long it would take to float from here to the imperial city of Charlestown. Adeline crossed her arms, leaning against a tree, looking down at the tombstone held like a treasure in the man's arms. She hadn't noticed it before, but in the middle of a circle of thick locust trees, there was a low tombstone engraved with beloved wife Adeline's grave. The familiar strokes of the characters revealed it was his handwriting. The man took out a thick stack of paper money from his arms and lit it. As the warm yellow flames crackled, Adeline glimpsed his pale lips moving up and down, seemingly murmuring something. Before long, she felt a weight in her palm. Looking down at the large stack of spirit money in her hand, she was momentarily stunned. Over the years, Adeline had thrived in the underworld, partly due to the preferential treatment as Hades' sister-in-law, and partly because she was the wealthiest female ghost in the entire underworld, frequently receiving large sums of money from unknown sources.
Adeline, Mr. Smith, who made chestnut cakes in the south of the city, has passed away. He left his stall to his son, Mr. Smith Jr. I tried it the other day, and the taste isn't as good as his father's. Adeline, Emily's son, is 5 years old now. I want to see him for you. He's very cute. Adeline, I heard that the lotus flowers in the Jiangnan area are blooming beautifully recently. I'll take you to see them in a few days.
He rested his forehead against the tombstone, his long black hair falling messily around his face. His narrow eyes were tightly closed, and the dense eyelashes couldn't hide the dark circles under his eyes. His gaunt cheeks, now flushed with an abnormal redness from drinking, revealed his exhaustion.
Adeline, Gabriel will come of age in 3 months.
He gently and carefully stroked the edge of the tombstone with his fingertips, as if touching something fragile.
I'll be able to see you soon.
Adeline furrowed her brows and floated in front of him, squatting down. The moonlight tonight was dim, shrouded by clouds and mist. Only by getting so close could she see the few strands of white hair at his temples and the fine lines at the corners of his eyes. She slowly curled her lips, a hum vibrating between her teeth, her expression soft and gentle.
Alexander, Who are you trying to fool?
Say it again! What are you here for?
Alexander's voice suddenly rose, his chest heaving violently as he stared at me with wide eyes.
To get the divorce letter.
I lay on the rocking chair, eating the hibiscus pastry he had baked, swaying my head uncontrollably from the delicious aroma.
Say it again.
Alexander's eyes were red, and he looked furious, but his hands didn't stop baking the pastries.
I've already said it 38 times.
Why do you want the divorce letter?
His head was lowered, and his voice was unclear. I couldn't quite see his expression.
Naturally, to marry another ghost.
A sudden gust of cold wind blew through, and the flames, after being momentarily extinguished, burned even more fiercely. At some point, Alexander had walked over to my side, his face dark and gloomy, looking more like a ghost than I did. I heard his teeth grinding.
Alexander, were you always this quick to anger?
His thin lips were tightly pressed together, and his tall, slender frame made his robe look a bit too large. My gaze shifted slightly to his prominently protruding shoulder blades, and I blinked.
Is that ghost good-looking?
Alexander's neck muscles twitched as if he was holding something back.
Not bad.
How does he compare to me?
His hand, hanging by his side, clenched into a fist.
He's younger than you.
I took a bite of the hibiscus pastry and glanced at him.
You!
Alexander's eye twitched violently. He reached out to grab my sleeve but caught nothing but air, leaving the room in silence. Alexander stared intently at my hand.
What? Is the Prime Minister trying to catch a ghost?
I rubbed my backside as I walked out of the ghost gate. Margaret's kicking skills had become more proficient. I pulled out the crumpled marriage contract from my pocket, frowning in frustration.
Alexander, she replied.
The long-faced female ghost had said that the reason this marriage contract was still valid even after my passing was because it bore the seal of the Imperial Jade Seal, stamped by my younger brother when he was 9 years old. Margaret almost fainted again when she heard this.
We need to get a divorce decree with that same seal.
I lowered my eyelashes and squatted outside the ghost gate, counting on my fingers and seriously considering how long it would take to float from here to the imperial city of Charlestown. I met Alexander when I was 16. At that time, he was the youngest prime minister of the southern Zhao, and I was the ill-fated princess who had consecutively caused the deaths of the emperor, my father, and 2 of my betrothed. Fortunately, the current emperor, my younger brother Gabriel, although frail since childhood, had not been affected by my misfortune. Otherwise, my princess residence would have been drowned in the spit of the common people.
Sister, the Prime Minister asked again if you have chosen a husband.
Gabriel ascended the throne at the age of 8. During a time when the court was unstable and the people's hearts were scattered, it was Alexander who, with his iron-fisted methods, helped him secure the throne within 6 months. His ruthless tactics were so feared that children in southern Zhao would stop crying at the mere mention of his name. I never quite liked Alexander, not because I feared his brutal methods, but because he had too many rules and always tried to control me. Despite being only 18, he acted like an old pedant. However, his taste in incense was not bad. He favored the lotus scent, which was my favorite.
Adeline, did you see that? Alexander and Victoria alone together again.
The first to notice the secret between Alexander and Victoria were Emily and I. Emily was the legitimate daughter of the general of the cavalry. Among all the noble ladies in Charlestown, she was my favorite, and I often invited her to the palace to play. Because of our playful nature, we accidentally stumbled upon Alexander and Victoria alone together several times. He always spoke softly to her and never adhered to any formalities in her presence. Emily and I quickly concluded that there was definitely something going on between them. Since then, I looked at Alexander with suspicion, seeing him as a wolf in sheep's clothing.
Sister, the Prime Minister asked again if you have chosen a husband.
The ministers, whether due to misfortune in their own homes or sheer boredom, continued to push for my marriage despite the mysterious deaths of my previous betrothed. They never urged Victoria in the same way.
Adeline, your father, and I think it's time for you to marry.
I'm only 16.
Your father had you when he was 16.
I don't want to hear it. Didn't you say you were going to be reincarnated? Hurry up and go.
Grandmother knows you are only 16, but Adeline, compared to ordinary people. Grandmother hopes that you can have what others have, even if it's just for a short time.
I buried my head deeper, only hearing the sighs of grandmother and father. I rubbed my backside as I walked out of the ghost gate. Margaret's kicking skills had become more proficient. I pulled out the crumpled marriage contract from my pocket, frowning in frustration.
This marriage contract is still valid even after my passing because it bears the seal of the Imperial Jade Seal, stamped by my younger brother when he was 9 years old.
Margaret almost fainted again when she heard this.
To dissolve this marriage contract, I need to obtain a divorce decree with the same seal.
I lowered my eyelashes and squatted outside the ghost gate, counting on my fingers and seriously considering how long it would take to float from here to the imperial city of Charlestown. My matchmaking process dragged on for an entire year. By the time I turned 17, I still hadn't chosen a consort.
What kind of man does sister like?
Gabriel asked, resting his small face on his hands while looking up at me from his documents. I was grinding ink for him and was momentarily stunned by his question.
I like handsome men who are tall. It would be best if they had a light fragrance.
Gabriel lowered his head, seemingly deep in thought.
Isn't that exactly like Alexander? He's the most handsome man in Charlestown, tall, and he smells nice.
What are you two talking about?
I quickly covered Gabriel's mouth.
Victoria, it's quite chilly today. You're not in good health. Why are you out at this time?
Adeline, don't change the subject. I heard you. You were talking about Alexander, weren't you? He is indeed the most handsome man in Charlestown.
Feeling a bit embarrassed, I released Gabriel's mouth and mumbled.
The Prime Minister's third son is also quite.
But before I could finish, Victoria pulled me up with a sincere expression.
Adeline, if you like him, why not let Alexander be your consort? He's very resilient and won't be easily harmed.
But Victoria, you.
Gabriel, what do you think?
Victoria's eyes sparkled as she looked at Gabriel. The young emperor blushed and nodded vigorously.
If Victoria thinks it's good, then Gabriel thinks it's good too.
In the 67th year of the Southern Zhao calendar, 2 significant events occurred in Charlestown. The Prime Minister's most outstanding third son inexplicably fell from his horse and broke his leg. In the same year, the chief advisor Alexander was appointed as my consort by the 9-year-old emperor. After careful calculation, I realized it had been 7 or 8 years since I last saw Gabriel. He had always been frail since childhood. In the first 2 years after my passing, I was so worried about him that I bribed a dream official in the underworld to enter his dreams. But after that, I never dared to visit him in his dreams again. I could navigate the palace with my eyes closed. Gabriel was almost 20 now. I wondered what he looked like.
Your Majesty.
A woman's soft moan reached my ears, and I halted outside the hall. The little boy had indeed grown up, even engaging in such activities in the study. After waiting for a long time, the woman was finally carried out with a flushed face. I took the opportunity to glance at her appearance, and my pupils widened in surprise. Gabriel couldn't see me, so I had to wait until he fell asleep. Mr. Brown seemed to have aged significantly. He stepped forward and draped a robe over Gabriel, who was sitting behind the desk.
Your Majesty, it's getting late. You should rest early.
Gabriel's thick black eyebrows were tightly knit. If it weren't for the few red marks on his neck, I might have been fooled by his diligent appearance. He hadn't changed much. The soft and adorable child had grown proportionally, but he had lost some of his childhood cuteness and gained more of the imperial majesty.
The day after tomorrow is Sister's death anniversary. Make sure to prepare carefully.
I raised my eyebrows slightly, feeling that my efforts in taking care of him when he was young hadn't been in vain.
Is Alexander still acting irrationally?
Your Majesty, those Taoist priests haven't been visiting the princess's residence lately.
But
according to reports from the servants, the Prime Minister has been frequently talking to the air and calling out the princess's name.
Gabriel's frown deepened, and he sighed.
Every year around this time, he becomes more unstable. Make sure to keep an eye on him and don't let him.
I understand.
Gabriel clung to me, finally stopping his sobbing, and wiped his tears.
The Imperial Seal is not with me.
I looked at him in confusion.
What do you mean?
A while ago, Alexander sent a message saying he needed to borrow the Imperial Seal, so I had Mr. Clark deliver it to the princess's residence.
You just gave the Imperial Seal away like that. Is this how you rule as an emperor?
Alexander isn't just anyone, he's also my brother-in-law.
I was so angry that my lips trembled.
He loves you very much, sister. When you first passed away, if it weren't for the letter you left behind, he might have followed you. Sister, you entered my dreams, but why haven't you visited him all these years?
Gabriel's lips parted as if he wanted to say something more.
And the royal physician said his health is all ready.
That concubine of yours just now, she looks like Victoria.
Gabriel instantly turned as red as a rooster with its neck squeezed, his cheeks flushing. He stammered for a long time before finally speaking.
Is sister doing well down there?
She's doing fine, living happily with Hades.
I glanced at him. The emperor, who appeared solemn and dignified in front of others, now hung his head dejectedly, just like when he was a child and would shrink his head like an ostrich when unhappy.
Sister, she's not father and mother's child.
He said this out of nowhere. I knew exactly what he meant and fiercely twisted his ear.
Even though sister isn't father and mother's biological child, you can't think like that. Gabriel, be a good emperor. And sister wishes you a happy coming-of-age ceremony in advance.
When I returned to the residence, I saw Alexander with a flushed face, collapsed under the locust tree, surrounded by scattered wine jars.
Adeline, the wine these days seems pretty good.
How good?
Alexander turned his head and smiled, no longer carrying the pretense of maturity from his youth.
Drinking this, I can see you every day. Even though you always ask me for a divorce letter when you speak. But I'm still very happy. I haven't seen you for a long, long time, Adeline. So long that I've almost forgotten what you look like.
A cool breeze rustled the locust tree leaves, and the atmosphere grew heavier. I watched as Alexander's face gradually turned pale.
Why plant so many locust trees?
Alexander's eyes were dazed as he looked up at me.
Locust trees?
His pupils moved slightly, and his gaze slowly shifted upward.
Why plant locust trees? The Taoist priest said locust trees gather in energy and nurture souls. I want her to come back.
She won't come back.
Why?
You're now thin and old, not attractive. She wouldn't like that.
Alexander raised his hand to touch his face, then turned to look at the tombstone, tears streaming down his cheeks.
Yes. I'm old. Adeline is forever 18. I'm already 30. I need to find her soon, or she'll really leave me.
The little ghosts on the locust tree peeked out, and I withdrew my hand.
Go to sleep, Alexander.
The ghosts on the tree chattered.
Do you think Alexander is foolish?
He performed countless rituals with those Taoist priests, and now that the person has really returned, he thinks it's just a drunken hallucination.
I think he's not just crazy. He's foolish too.
June 15th marked the 10th anniversary of my passing. Gabriel, as he promised, held a grand banquet in my honor. Alexander, wearing a white flower on his head, looked thin and frail, almost like a sickly beauty. I floated by a plate, eating the pastries he had made, resting my chin on my hand as I watched him. As the saying goes, morning attire makes one look more elegant, and it was indeed true. Alexander spent the whole day drinking alone in a corner, and Gabriel let him be.
In Gabriel's words, it was rare for Alexander to agree to come.
Why are you staring at me?
Gabriel has grown into a fine emperor. Are you happy?
I sat beside him and nodded.
Quite happy. If he could send me more jewelry every year, I'd be even happier.
Alexander chuckled softly.
I've sent you plenty too.
His tone lowered, sounding like a child seeking attention.
Emily.
Alexander called out, his fingers clutching a letter. Emily, with her hair tied up, scratched her head.
A month ago. Why?
Alexander smiled bitterly, his voice hoarse.
Nothing.
After Emily left, Alexander staggered out with a wine jug. I followed him, my gaze falling on the letter in his hand.
Won't you read the letter?
Alexander's lips twisted in self-mockery.
Adeline, every year on this day, I receive a letter from you through Emily. There are 9 letters neatly arranged in the study cabinet. I know what's written in this letter. It's the same as the others, just 6 words. Take good care of Gabriel.
Alexander took a swig of wine.
Adeline, I've protected him and made him an excellent emperor. Now, the southern kingdom is at its most prosperous, and the people are the wealthiest they've ever been. Gabriel will be remembered in history. I've fulfilled my promise.
He turned to me, his eyes bloodshot, his voice breaking.
Adeline, I've fulfilled my promise. Can't you pity me, Why can everyone else dream of you? But not me. Adeline, June 15th was supposed to be our wedding day, the day I looked forward to the most in my life. Adeline, can't you pity me? Please.
I never knew that even as a ghost, my eyes could feel sore.
I'm right here beside you.
I heard my own voice, choked with emotion. Alexander raised his hand to touch my face, but it passed through me. His eyes filled with tears, and his lips curved into a bitter smile.
But you're not real. You're just a figment of my drunken imagination. Adeline never loved me, so why would she stay by my side?
Ever since Gabriel arranged the marriage between Alexander and me, I have been avoiding Alexander. The wedding was scheduled for the following year, on June 15th, when I would turn 18. Gabriel mentioned that he and Victoria had spent an entire night with the ceremonial officer to choose this auspicious date. But one cannot hide forever. I was cornered by Alexander at the princess's residence. The betrothal gifts he brought piled up from one end of Chang'an Street to the other. However,
why did you bring my sister instead of your elders to deliver the betrothal gifts?
I looked at Alexander, who was dressed in a silver-white silk robe. This fabric was a rare tribute from the Western court earlier that year, with only one piece available. Gabriel had given it to Victoria because she liked it, and now Alexander was wearing it.
Princess Evelyn is extremely important to me.
For some reason, I recalled the time Emily and I secretly watched him conversing with Victoria. His demeanor was warm and smiling, completely different from how he was with me. Suddenly, I felt disinterested.
It was not my intention to make you the consort. Gabriel is young, and his arbitrary matchmaking is somewhat frivolous. After we marry, we will only be husband and wife in name, and we will not interfere with each other privately.
That was the first time I saw the usually composed and self-restrained Alexander lose his composure. But he quickly regained his composure and only asked,
"Is the princess's heart set on someone else?"
The silver-white silk dazzled my eyes, and I turned my head away in irritation, responding,
Yes.
When did I find out that Victoria was Alexander's sister? It seems it was on the day Alexander came of age, which was also the day we met for the first time after he proposed. Alexander's coming-of-age ceremony was not widely publicized, but Gabriel still organized a private banquet for him in the palace. Victoria was very happy and, despite never having drunk alcohol before, she even had several glasses of fruit wine. She affectionately held Alexander's hand in front of me, and Alexander did not refuse.
Adeline, come, give me your hand.
When I looked up, I saw Victoria, her face flushed with drunkenness, holding Alexander's hand and standing in front of me. She was placing my hand in Alexander's hand, sighing.
How wonderful! How wonderful, my dear brother and my favorite sister together.
I was shocked, my eyes wide open, while Alexander remained calm.
Adeline, Alexander is very pitiful. He has never asked me for anything in his life. I have the Empress to take care of me, but he has nothing, nothing at all. The person he asked for is you. Those betrothal gifts, he saved for a long time, almost all his savings over the years are there. Alexander will be very good to you. He fears he is not worthy of you. I have never seen him like this. For a long time, he knelt outside my palace for a long time.
My mind was in chaos, not knowing whether to be shocked that Victoria was not my sister but Alexander's sister, or to be shocked by Alexander's flushed ears. In the end, I still gave him the coming-of-age gift I had prepared early on.
The finest mutton fat jade from Nanzhao, cherish it well, Prime Minister.
Alexander accepted it, lowering his eyes and respectfully thanking me.
Although Princess Evelyn is indeed my sister, you need not take her words to heart. I know the princess has someone else in her heart. Alexander will never.
Prime Minister Alexander, do you know what I hate the most in my life?
What?
I hate it the most when someone stands in front of me, yet keeps their eyes lowered, not looking at me, and even says some sarcastic words.
As soon as I finished speaking, I took a few steps closer to him. At that moment when I looked up, I looked straight into Alexander's eyes, and the person reflected in those deep black pupils was me. As my wedding date with Alexander drew nearer, I found myself visiting the Golden Terrace Temple more frequently. Alexander always waited for me at the bottom of the 100-step staircase.
The princess has come 5 times this month.
Yes, I have something to ask for, I replied. And you, Prime Minister, do you have anything to ask for?
Of course, but what I seek, I rely on myself for. I don't believe in gods or Buddhas because they have never helped me.
Is that so? But what I seek can only be entrusted to the gods and Buddhas. The road down from the Golden Terrace Temple was bumpy and noisy.
What is the princess talking about?
I said, let's change our route to the south of the city and buy some chestnut pastries to take back. The wind fluttered the carriage curtains, and outside the window, the greenery was full of life. The early summer breeze carried Alexander's slightly cheerful response.
All right, princess.
Sister, are you going to be like father?
I patted his head and waved the imperial physician away, a smile hanging on my face. Haven't we practiced this many times, Gabriel? You promised not to cry.
Emily also promised not to cry, but look at her, she's wailing.
I glanced at Emily, who was crying into the blanket at the foot of the bed, and couldn't help but laugh. Emily, remember to keep the letter safe. Emily pulled down the blanket, her swollen eyes quickly filling with tears again, and she nodded while sobbing. And you, I tapped Gabriel's head, you just need to grow up obediently, understand?
He bit his lip and suddenly burst into tears.
My head felt dizzy, but I still smiled. Why are you crying? I'm not gone yet. If I were to leave, it would be after the wedding. Unexpectedly, my words made them cry even harder. Adeline rubbed her backside as she walked out of the ghost gate, feeling the sting from Margaret's proficient kick. She pulled out the crumpled marriage contract from her pocket, frowning in frustration.
This marriage contract is still valid even after my passing because it bears the seal of the Imperial Jade Seal, stamped by my younger brother when he was just 9 years old.
Margaret nearly fainted upon hearing this revelation. To dissolve the marriage contract, Adeline needed a divorce decree with the same seal.
How long will it take to float from here to the imperial city of Charlestown?
She lowered her eyelashes and squatted outside the ghost gate, counting on her fingers and seriously considering her journey. I rubbed my backside as I walked out of the ghost gate. Margaret's kicking skills had become more proficient. I pulled out the crumpled marriage contract from my pocket, frowning in frustration.
The reason this marriage contract is still valid even after your passing is because it bears the seal of the Imperial Jade Seal, stamped by your younger brother when he was 9 years old.
Margaret almost fainted again when she heard this. To dissolve this marriage contract, I needed to obtain a divorce decree with the same seal. I lowered my eyelashes and squatted outside the ghost gate, counting on my fingers and seriously considering how long it would take to float from here to the imperial city of Charlestown.
With the divorce letter, Alexander will forget about you.
In Hades' hall, Victoria gently patted my head with a look of pity. I bit into the overly sweet osmanthus cake, pretending not to understand.
It's a pity that the vendor who sold chestnut cakes has reincarnated. This osmanthus cake tastes quite ordinary.
I kept it from you for so long, not letting you know that the marriage contract would continuously drain his life.
Who would have thought that an old boatman would spill the beans?
If I had known he was such a blabbermouth, I would have thrown him into the river to feed the fish.
I struggled to swallow the last bite of the osmanthus cake, wiped my mouth, and smiled at Victoria.
I'll be going now, Victoria.
By the river of forgetfulness, there is a dust mirror. Watching it for an hour costs millions of underworld coins, and I am a yearly subscriber. In the mirror, the sleeping man's face was no longer pale, and his thin cheeks finally had a bit of color. I sat on the riverbank, carefully flipping through a stack of rice paper as tall as half a person. The boatman, Mr. Johnson, sneaked up behind me to peek.
Why are all these drawings of you, young lady?
Do they look good? Aren't they all exactly like me?
Did you buy this stack of drawings during a trip to the human world?
I didn't buy them.
Stole them?
Yes, from a cabinet.
From the cabinet of the man in the mirror?
Yes.
You saved his life, young lady.
Yes.
He will forget about you.
That's okay.
Today, the dust mirror broke. I sat by the river of forgetfulness, staring blankly, watching Mr. Johnson ferrying souls back and forth until...
It's broken, young lady. The man in your mirror has passed away.
And behind him, a man was holding a letter, smiling freely, his eyes shining like stars. So, the 10th letter did not say take good care of Gabriel. Instead, it said, what I seek is to marry you successfully.